Hi friends, Ashley from Wildwoods&Homestead. We are heading into fall and our trees are turning this beautiful golden color. The days are cooling off. Much of our garden is just slowly dying back and showing signs of harvest that are ready. So we are in this very busy transitional phase here, and it's a phase that I have wanted to do and be a part of for years and years. Before I was even married, I knew that I wanted to have a big family, and I knew that I wanted to maybe have a little farm or homestead. I knew that I wanted to grow food for my family and learn ways to preserve that food for my family. All of these things were just something that I was very passionate about, even in high school. And it wasn't really something that was an overly popular idea at the time. I think it is taking root in a lot of women's lives, and I'm meeting a lot more homesteaders and just moms and dads that just have a desire to grow their own food and put it away for their family and just kind of shift a little bit on how they provide for their family. So we had some friends who invited us out to harvest their apples, and I looked at this like a resource, and I didn't want this resource to go to waste. So we definitely took the opportunity to go out and visit for a little bit and harvest these apples. And I had a lot of them. I had 4 totes full to the brim of these beautiful apples, and I decided that while I'm very new to canning and I'm very new to learning how to do how to harvest and use the harvest that I grow, I decided to just jump in and try some things. So I just set up my camera and filmed over the course of a few weeks as I experimented with different ways to use these apples. And as I was pleased with the recipes that I was working on, those are the recipes that I decided to can. So I will just get right to that part of this video, which is just sharing some of the things that I did with these apples. And one of the first things is that I decided to make an apple syrup. This is a sugar-based apple syrup. I used basically just apples, water, and organic cane sugar. And we are not doing grains. I used to do sourdough, and pretty much every day we had a sourdough item on our table, whether that was fresh bread or English muffins or pancakes. But we have been kind of struggling with grains and sort of slowly eliminating those from our diet. We do, however, make kombucha. I make kombucha weekly, and something that I don't always get around to is a second ferment of kombucha. And I decided that making some apple syrup would be a really good way to utilize the nutrients from these apples and even the sugar itself. I use organic cane sugar, and to put something away on the shelf that kept me from buying juice or just anything for making a second ferment of kombucha. Also, I found that doing a second ferment of kombucha with this apple syrup was really delicious, really satisfying, and it just seemed like a worthwhile thing for me to can. On top of that, I decided to make an apple chutney because we do eat a lot of meat and potatoes. And meat and potatoes can get pretty boring. But I find that if you can make a gravy or a sauce or just add something that has a little bit of a different flavor, that complements the plainness of meat and potatoes, it makes it seem like you're not eating the same thing every day. So I did write down this recipe for this apple chutney. Apple chutney is one of those things that I think you can make with pretty much anything. You could put some cranberries in there. You can make it with pears. So I just figured out a ratio of ingredients that I liked the flavor of. And once I found the flavor that I liked, that is the apple chutney that I made in a large quantity and canned. This is my apple syrup, and I was just trying to figure out the ratio of sugar to apples for that. So this was the first day that I really got started on figuring out the recipes, and thankfully I had a lot of apples to experiment with, so I wasn't too worried about wasting the produce, because I also have chickens and nothing goes to waste in our house. If we don't consume it, our chickens do, and then of course they give us eggs. So that just seems like a really good kind of cyclical thing there. Anyway, I'm also sharing the second ferment of the kombucha. So for my kombucha, I chose to use this gallon jar, and I did a third of that jar would be my apple syrup, and then 2/3 of it is kombucha. I have found that ratio to be really good for creating a nice bubbly sweet ferment. And I used to do it in smaller quantities, but as our family has grown, I just find it a lot easier to do a second ferment in a large gallon jar with a flip top like that. And I do share a little bit later in this video how that kombucha turned out. It was so great. And I just think that that's a really great way to utilize those nutrients from the apples and the sugar, because the fermentation process does create vitamins that would not be there if you were not fermenting the product. So here's my syrup, and I did figure out a ratio of apples to water to sugar. And what I loved about this syrup is that I took the apples and I used the apple portion to make apple chutney, apple butter, and apple sauce, as well as a few cobblers. And the scraps, instead of taking the scraps and throwing them out, I used them to make this apple syrup. I would like to figure out how to make scrap apple vinegar. I think that would be a really worthwhile product to make, but for right now with a newborn, there are days where it does feel a little bit overwhelming producing the food that I want to for my family, and I have to make decisions. Also, just with limited space in my kitchen, I have to make decisions if I'm going to have a bunch of jars of vinegar fermenting on my counter, or am I going to have my kombucha on my counter. I really don't like it when my counters get too cluttered, especially with all the ferments, and I don't have a lot of pantry space for ferments. So for this time, I did not make apple cider vinegar with my scraps, but I think that would be a really good use of those scraps if you were canning apples. So here are my apple syrup jars, and even though most of the apples were green, my apple syrup came out as this beautiful red color, and it was so pretty, and it was also just very, very tasty. So I felt that was worthwhile to make and can, and it was also incredibly easy because I would just mix my apples with the water and sugar and let that simmer on the stove throughout the day while I did my regular routine. And then I would come back to it at the end of the day and strain my apple syrup into my clean jars and put them into my water bath pot. I don't have a canner, I just have this big stock pot. So I made my syrup in the stock pot, filled my jars, and then washed my stock pot and filled it with water. And then I just placed a towel at the bottom because I don't have a canning rack. And I had a friend mention to me that you can just put a towel at the bottom and it keeps the jars from breaking. I did have a jar break here, and I left this part in the video just to show this. I don't think the jar broke because I don't have a canning rack at the bottom. What I have noticed is that our family has this really bad habit of leaving these jars in the sink and filling them with water and then just dropping our silverware, you know, when everybody's clearing their dishes after a meal, just dropping their silverware into the jar. And what I have found is that this slowly over time just degrades the integrity of the jar. And anybody who cans knows that the canning jars are not cheap. So this is something that I'm really trying to work with my family on, is that we don't just leave those jars in the sink and we don't just drop our silverware in it, because I have the bottoms of my jars break. So I am trying to be really careful about that, because I do have quite a few canning jars and I do reuse them, and I love the fact that I can reuse them. So that was why I had that jar break, but again, I just think it was the lack of the integrity of the bottom of that jar. It had probably been slightly cracked, or just had been the bottom of it hit too many times. But that was the only jar that I had crack. After that, I was really careful to pay attention to my jars as I was cleaning them, and then I just didn't have that problem again. And then I just shared there, I was also putting my apple chutney in there and canning that. So that was my first day of canning, and it was the apple chutney and the apple syrup. On this day, my baby was getting to be a bit fussy, and I did find the canning process to be overwhelming. I think I found it to be overwhelming though because I'm very new at it, and I was really nervous about germs. I was really nervous, especially about bacteria, and I had done a lot of reading on it, and I think I became a little bit fearful reading a little bit, kind of reading the intense side of botulism. But I did run across a channel, I think her channel is called Survival HT, I think, and she has a really good video on what botulism is, and on water bath canning. So if I think of that, I will find that and put that in the description of this video for anybody who might be interested. And it was watching her video that just gave me a little bit more confidence to proceed. Even then, I was still pretty nervous about washing my jars and disinfecting everything and making sure that the tops of my jars were clean. And some of it I was moving a little bit slow because it's like I had to process the concept of what I was doing, and oh my goodness, am I really going to put this on my cabinet and feed it to my family in 6 months or a year? But I know that the sugar also helps with that. It is a preservation method too, is adding sugar to something to keep the bacteria from proliferating. I have done ferments a lot. We ferment salsa and sauerkraut. We ferment a lot of veggies and, of course, kombucha. And that does not make me nervous because of the bacteria. And I feel like there are more signs in a ferment to tell you if that ferment is off compared to canning. So that all of those reasons are why I was just feeling pretty nervous about this. But again, something I really want to learn and utilize. So on this day, this is the same day I had just changed my dress because my baby had spit up on it. I continued with my apple syrup, again making that with all of my scraps, and then I made applesauce, and that applesauce did look quite dark. I'll show a little jar of it here soon, but I think it looks so dark because I added a lot of cinnamon and clove to it because our family really loves cinnamon. And I ended up not canning the applesauce. It only made about 3 quarts of applesauce, so in my mind I didn't think that was worth canning, and I didn't know if I wanted to make the applesauce again. It was tasty. It turned out nice and thick. Our family just ate it throughout the week, and that was really nice because we just had it on as a side for breakfast, some scrambled eggs and a little bit of applesauce, or sometimes my kids will take the applesauce and mix it with a little bit of yogurt. And I just viewed it as like a little snack through the week, but I ended up not making another batch of applesauce. I ended up sticking with making the apple syrup and the apple chutney, and I did end up making some apple butter. And then I'm just sharing here how I clean my jars. If I was canning a lot, I would probably fill my dishwasher and run my dishwasher, but on this day I didn't want to wait for the dishwasher to wash. I think I can't remember, I think I had like 6 jars or something. So I just went ahead and hand washed those with hot soapy water. And in my videos, I do like to just share how I use the products that I make and sell. So I am just showing here that I'm using my solid dish soap bar, which is very degreasing, and I don't react to it. I started formulating my own dish soaps because I had issues with reacting to even some natural products. So I'm just using that dish bar. And then I also sell these cotton dishcloths in my shop, and I'll have a link to my shop in the description box for anybody who might want to take a look at those items. After I washed all of my jars, I just used some boiling water to pour onto my jars, and I put all of my lids in a bowl and then just poured boiling water over those lids. So that was how I disinfected my jars. And this was another day, and I wanted to share how this kombucha turned out. It was so bubbly and it was so delicious. We had it with Emil, my mother-in-law. They live with us. They live in an in-law suite that my father-in-law and mother-in-law have built. And she came up to have a meal with us, and so I thought it was just the perfect time to pull out this kombucha, and it turned out so nice. It was appley and sweet and bubbly, and I felt pretty satisfied about that because I've got lots of quarts of apple syrup now, and I know exactly what I will do with them. And then I made a roast beef, and with that I used some of the apples paired with some onion, baked that, and then I put my apple chutney on top of the roast and then returned the roast to the oven just to bake a little bit to get some of that sweetness and tartness of the apple chutney into the roast. And I did write out a recipe for that apple chutney, and I will leave that in the description box, as well as a recipe for my apple syrup. I will leave that in the description box as well. Okay, so by this day, I felt like I was really starting to get a hang of it. I had my kids helping me more. I found that with them in the kitchen, we were able to get it done a lot faster. And then they weren't waiting on me to finish up what I was doing so that we could go and do, something else. So I just enlisted their help, and they all did such a great job. I had some people washing, some people cutting, some people mixing. And on this day, I decided to make apple butter. And as I went to go make it, I realized that I did not have any brown sugar. So it really didn't taste like apple butter that I knew as a child, but it still cooked up nice and thick. I added some besides the sugar, I added some cinnamon and clove, and then I just put that on to cook throughout the day while I went about doing my other various chores. We are also every day trying to go out and just harvest carrots. I did have some ideas for canning in regard to the carrots and potatoes that we have in the garden, but this season of a newborn, I'm finding that I have to reevaluate my expectations, and I've realized that is okay and totally worthwhile. So if I have any moms who have little kids and you're looking for canning inspiration, or homesteading or gardening inspiration, I think one of the things that I would say is be inspired by newborn life, because it is so exhausting and you are putting a great deal of your time and energy into raising this little human being. And if you're only just eating from your garden for a season, or you're not able to can anything, or you're only able to can a couple of things, but you're, raising a little baby, I think that is really worthwhile, and that it's okay to adjust expectations. So I have had to daily adjust my expectations. And here is one of those adjustments. I like to make a cheesy macaroni or a cheesy rice casserole. And normally I'll make a roux where I saute my onions with my butter, and then I'll put a little bit of flour when we were eating flour, or a little bit of starch in some milk, and then some cheese. And I'll just take the time to whisk that and create a proper roux, and then pour it over my already cooked rice with the vegetables mixed in. But on this day, I was feeling really tired from all of the canning, and I thought, well, I do need to be wise with my energy and time, and I have taken a lot of time and energy to can these apples. So what can I do instead for supper to make up for the fact that I'm just kind of out of this resource of time and energy today? So I felt like this was a really good, I'm going to call it my canning casserole. And all I did was just soak a little bit of rice and pour it into my cast iron Dutch oven with some vegetables and leftover meat, with some shredded cheese, and then some milk and water that were mixed with tapioca starch. And I poured all of that in and topped it with cheese and salt and pepper, and covered it and put it into a 350-degree oven. I almost said onion. And let that bake while I continue to finish this canning process. And I think that casserole is really versatile, because you could also use tuna, so you can make like a tuna casserole. You could use chicken or pork. It could just be vegetarian if you don't eat meat. I think it's just a great thing to just put a bunch of things in that you happen to maybe have leftovers or just in the cupboard. And I was not expecting it to turn out that great, but it was actually really tasty and really satisfying. And it was just nice to know that it was in there cooking while I was still canning, because I don't know about I don't know how it feels for other moms, but sometimes when you're doing something extra in your schedule, it can feel a little bit nerve-wracking when you're also thinking about, oh my goodness, everybody's going to be home soon and they're going to be hungry. So that was the casserole. I just showed it before it was finished. I ended up needing to stir it and bake it a little bit longer. And then all of that rice was cooked nicely after it baked a little bit longer. And it was really nice and filling. And we had some sauerkraut to put on the side with that. And it was a really nice, simple meal. Now, I definitely speak for myself, and could probably speak for other women who have spent a couple of weeks canning just about anything. It is so satisfying to set your jars out and look at what you have accomplished. Like, all of that is work. I mean, that is just sheer hard work, and it's a provision for your family. And that felt so satisfying to me. And even though throughout the week I had a lot of challenges juggling a newborn, we are getting back into school. Some of my kids are taking on harder subjects, which means I'm taking on harder subjects. We also have a lot of building things like for heating in our shop and greenhouse that are time sensitive that we need to get working. Also firewood. because we rely on that to heat our water in our home. All of this was still going on in the background of this video, and it did feel very overwhelming at times, but it was so satisfying to get those jars wiped down, to look at those, and I felt like, oh, I can do this again. I can can other stuff. So even though I was really tired by the end of it, I felt motivated for the next canning session, whatever that might be, and if that might be in this season, I am not sure. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys joining me. I hope that you found something useful in this video, and I'm going to wrap it up, and I hope to see you next time.